thank you all. So you're going to get a notification of that. And if I may just start with a word of prayer, and then I will go ahead and I'm trying to multitask. It's not easy.
I like Agnes Brady's picture.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad. Okay. Okay. Let's have a word of prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gifts of technology and for beloved friends from near and far to join in this conversation with the Reverend Dr. Margaret Towner. Lord, we thank you as one of her 5,000 daughters who paved the way for us on this pathway of ordination. And so, Lord, we just give you thanks for this time and for all those who have gathered here. May it be a fruitful and joyful evening as we celebrate the 67th anniversary of Margaret's ordination on October 24th of this year. In all ways, we give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you.
Okay. And I am doing my best here to coordinate and let people in all at the same time. So Margaret, you've got a number of folks here, and we've had a lot of conversations. I'm sure folks have heard from time to time your story as far as, or maybe they haven't. You want to share a little bit about your story and your journey towards ordination, because when you went to seminary, a woman being ordained was not even a possibility. So
in the Presbyterian Church.
In the Presbyterian Church, correct.
Well, for a long time, I had sort of rejected the church from junior high on. And then after I didn't reject the church per se, I was very active in college and in the choirs and so on. I loved to sing in choirs and so on. And then I had a chance to, I moved back to Syracuse to where my mother lived, and got involved in the church through Harry Taylor at First Presbyterian Church. And I then began to change my attitude and mind about clergy. The negativeness was sort of made in my mind because underneath I had my dad was an ordained minister, but in college teaching. But underneath I had a distrust of him because I felt he was being unfaithful, which turned out he was. So that sort of tainted my mind about clergy and about the church. But meeting Harry Taylor and then getting involved at First Church, and then I got involved at a little bit at Park Central. I was a professional photographer and had been a photographer at the Mayo Clinic. And so I was used by the churches in Syracuse, the Presbytery, to photograph a lot of different activities and events. And at First Presbyterian and at Park Central. And then Herb Schrader at East Genesee Church needed some help with his youth budget and with his young people. And so then I became a sort of a staff person with Herb Schrader at East Genesee Church. And between Herb Schrader and then Jim Harris, who was the associate at First Presbyterian, and then Bill McConaughey, who came after Harry Taylor at First Pres, and the pastor at I believe it was Southminster, Dick Firth, the more I got involved in some of the work in those churches, the more they began to say, why don't you investigate seminary? And so that was the next step. I did, because they were all graduate, well, they were mostly graduates of Union Seminary in New York. They had a scholarship, the Scattergood Fund scholarship, and they sent me to Union on that scholarship. And while I was at Union, of course, I got a chance to study with Niebuhr and Tillich and the woman that was
where did you do your internship? Weren't you at
oh, I was at Madison. Well, I started out at Riverside in the junior high department, but then I got called to serve in my it was called field work then at Madison Avenue Church in New York. And I was there for the 2.5 years, and mostly in the primary department, but we all had our turns at assisting in the worship service in the evenings at Madison Avenue. And of course, I had got to know George Buttrick very well, and he became a great supporter and a friend. And there was the other 6 co-pastors of Madison Avenue, which was an interesting kind of an experience. But I worked with them, and then when graduation came, it was 54. I couldn't be ordained, so the presbytery had me become a commissioned church worker. And I was examined by Syracuse Cayuga as a commissioned church worker. And at that, the presbytery, Cayuga Syracuse Presbytery, asked if I would like to have anybody special come to preach. And I said, yeah, I would like to have Dr. Van Dusen, who was a great ecumenist at that time. And they said, oh, well, you'll never get him. We've been trying for years to get him up here to Syracuse, and we haven't been able to. And I said, well, I'd like to try. I had become a good friend of Dr. Van Dusen because he was really pushing and supporting me in the travels towards ordination. And he was a great friend and supporter. And I had a number of times gone into his office and not complained, but made suggestions of what I thought they needed to do in terms of their training of pastors. One of them was that he invited at the president's conference, which all of the senior students spent a couple hours in Van Dusen's attic study, listening to pastors from different churches, and all of the pastors were from the big churches like Christ and like Riverside Church and Madison Avenue. And I went into him and I said, Dr. Van Dusen, how many of my classmates will leave here and go into a Riverside Church or a Christ Church or any other big church? I said, they probably will be having to go into a small congregation somewhere, maybe in the Midwest or in the East, whatever. And by golly, 2 weeks later, he invited a pastor from a small church in Ohio. And so he, he listened to some of the concerns that I had. I do, there's one, well, I'm wandering. It's too bad because I just remembered an incident with my advisor, Dr. Bennett. When I went into him, I was getting kind of confused by in Tillich's class in particular, with the questions and the comments that my fellow students were making. And I said, you know, I don't know, maybe I don't belong here, but I sure don't understand what some of these guys are saying. And Dr. Bennett said, well, Margaret, you're not the one that's confused, which was a nice kind of a support. But anyway, the events that I went through, and Van Dusen, I went into his office and I said, I'm going to be commissioned and I would really like for you to come and deliver the major sermon. And he said, well, I'd be happy to if I have the date. And it was to be May 30th. And he looked on his calendar and said, I can be there. And so Syracuse Cayuga Presbytery was a little bit floored, but he did come and he delivered the sermon. So it was a great occasion.
And was that 1954, Margaret, when you were commissioned?
When I was commissioned.
So I know you, and you, I know you served in a church after that, but let's fast forward to 1956, because there was an overture that came to the General Assembly, correct?
Right.
And didn't that come from Rochester, New York?
It came from Third Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York. The elder there, the woman elder there, proposed to her session that they make a proposal to the presbytery that there be the ordination of women to the ministry of Word and Sacrament. And that eventually went to General Assembly, and it was assigned to a number of committees, and they deliberated for a couple of years, and finally came up with the idea that there was really no reason why women could not be ordained. They had been ordained as elders and as deacons, and so why couldn't they be ordained as ministers of Word and Sacrament? So then that passed in 1956, the General Assembly, and then the ministers at First Pres and Herb Schrader and Dick Firth, I have a feeling that they were trying to maybe use me because they were pushing that I would be ordained. And they wrote to the pastors I was working with in Allentown, who were against ordination of women. They wrote to the pastors there and wondering if maybe they would like to have me ordained in Allentown, or would they be willing to transfer me from Lehigh Presbytery up to Syracuse Cayuga to be ordained at First Pres in Syracuse. And so there wasn't much they could object to. And so we worked on a service and we planned it, and I pulled a little politics. I asked the pastor Eastwood to preach the sermon, and the other assistant pastor, Walter Fitton, to offer the pastoral prayer. And so then they were invited to come and participate, and they couldn't object too much. And then the Allentown Presbyterian Church choir decided they were going to come and sing. And so the whole choir came up from Allentown, and it was a really great time. And my mother, she had a third floor studio, a large apartment, and in an ancient home. It was actually the home of a famous writer, for the Saturday Evening Post, and there was a large meeting game room, which we had as a dining room, and she invited the whole choir and all of the participants in the worship service to supper, and they all came up, and somehow let's see, it was the photographer,
Alfred Eisenstadt.
Alfred Eisenstadt. Life magazine got wind of it, and they sent Alfred Eisenstadt. He came up to the apartment and he said, well, where's the banquet? And my mother said, right here. And so he stayed, and then of course he followed through. You didn't know he was around. He was a skilled photographer, and he was never in the way. Whereas there were some photographers there that the ushers asked to move out because they were being a little bit obnoxious and in the way during the service. But Eisenstadt, you wouldn't know, was there, and he was very gracious, and I loved getting to know him. So anyhow,
Margaret,
that I wondered, you turned me back.
No. Before you got to the ordination service, you told me a story, and I think it was Dick Firth that came up and told you years later about how, share that story about the golf match.
Yeah, well, there were quite a number of naysayers in Syracuse Cayuga Presbytery. One of them was Art Milkey, who happened to be our neighbor in Syracuse. Art Milkey at Park Central Church was against the ordination of women and said it'll never happen in your lifetime. Well, of course, it was happening. And then I was told a number of years later at a General Assembly meeting, Dick Firth was there. And Dick said, Margaret, I've got to tell you a story about your ordination. He said, when it came to getting some support of some of the pastors in the presbytery, he said, we invited them to go and play golf. And then we covenanted that we would let them win, so they would be in a good mood to talk about ordaining Marg. And I didn't know about that until several years later, when I was serving on the advisory council of discipleship and worship, and I was at a GA meeting, and Dick was there as a commissioner. That was the story you wanted.
So they let him win. They let the opponents
win. They let them win.
Opponents to win.
I'm not sure how enthusiastic Art Milkey was ever, but he went along with the crowd.
Oh yeah, he did. He went along with the crowd, and he finally did it. Margaret, what was one of your most memorable moments in the 67 years that you've been a minister of the Word and Sacrament? Can you even narrow it down to one memorable moment?
One, of course, the ordination was probably the most memorable. And I think, I guess I would say that my serving on the Advisory Council of Discipleship and Worship was a memorable experience, because I got to work with people in the whole United States who had been elected to that council, which was new in 1971. It seems that every time that, in my opinion, every time the church began to do things significant socially and politically and so on, we would reorganize. And so in 79, they reorganized and established two councils to the General Assembly. council, and that one was the Advisory Council of Discipleship and Worship. And I had been invited, or I had been asked to serve on the Board of Pensions, but the pastor that I worked with in Indianapolis, Lindquist, was at all of the staff meetings, said his dream was to serve on the Board of Pensions. And he was very jealous of the work I was doing. And so the pastor at Second Presbyterian Church was also on the permanent nominating committee. And I called him up and I said, he also was a classmate of mine in seminary. I said, I need to talk to you. You know that I've been asked to serve on the Board of Pensions. And did you know that Howard's dream is to do that? And I said, you can't serve. You can't do that. And so we ended up, and a couple hours later, he called and said, there's a new council. We don't know what it's supposed to do, but the Advisory Council on Discipleship and Worship, would you like to serve on that? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. So that's how I got on that.
Yes, yes. And I know that you worked a lot with young people, and you've always kind of shared that that's been one of your joys, is developing those relationships. Can you want to share a little bit about those?
Yes, I when I went to Tacoma Park, I was working very closely with the staff of the senior high group, and also with the young people, the senior highs themselves. And in fact, the church had a basketball court, and I would go on Saturday mornings and play basketball with some of the young people. But anyway, yes, I think one of the things that I did starting out in Kalamazoo was to conduct work study tours with young people. And we didn't have a bus, we just had car caravans. And we did work study out in the Southwest at the House of Neighborly Service in Tucson. It was our first adventure. And then we went up to the Northeast to the Navajo country. And then we did study tours of the Pittsburgh missions. And we did also some work study tours of colleges. Some of the young people that were struggling with what to do after high school. I took a 2-car caravan of young people and their advisors on a study tour of some of the Presbyterian colleges in the Midwest, and help them. We did our study tours were all by auto caravans. And we had one father who was a plumber and had a truck, and he volunteered to carry all of our luggage in his pickup truck. And he went on all of the study tours and was a great friend and companion for us all. And our church cook at First Presbyterian Kalamazoo, Lizzie Scammerhorn, volunteered to go along. She was in her 80s. She volunteered to go along with the sleeping bag and advise the kids and work with them on preparing all of the meals. So those were really memorable kinds of experiences.
Yeah. Now, I know that there were some challenges too. I remember you sharing, well, first of all, even after you ordained, you weren't allowed to celebrate union. You had to pantomime what the male pastors were doing in the sanctuary.
Right.
There was also your first presbytery meeting where they had always
they didn't know what to do with me.
What did they, and tell me
They
what they said.
They addressed the presbytery. The presbytery address from the moderator used to be fathers and brethren. And so then the moderator, when I came, said, well, now I don't know what we do. What do we call her? Do we call, say, brethren and sister? And so that got Lehigh Presbytery started. Anyway, that was sort of interesting.
Yeah, so
The communion thing was, I don't know, the Eastwood didn't really accept the fact that I was ordained. I did preaching in some of the churches in Lehigh Valley, but never at First Pres. And the communion thing, I never served communion in the sanctuary. As I said, they had an overflow crowd in the fellowship hall, and I pantomimed what was coming over the loudspeaker. The first time I served in the sanctuary was at First Presbyterian Church in Kalamazoo.
yeah. Yeah. What do you think, if you can even think going back all those years ago and being the first, were some of the challenges that maybe the women who are being ordained today, maybe they're still seeing some of that, or the things that we still continue to see, or the things that they wouldn't even be able to conceive that, you faced. What were some of those challenges, Margaret?
Well, the acceptance of a woman as being somebody that people thought were personifications of Jesus Christ, and to them it was a male. So that's sort of a barrier that we had to break down. I found that the women, many of the women at Tacoma Park, where I served as Christian educator before ordination, and sorry, I have a sore hip, so I'm moving around a little bit. Some of the women at Tacoma Park were very, very supportive, and then the women at First Presbyterian Church and Allentown, when I was ordained, the Allentown women gave me a very fine home communion kit, which I used quite a bit in my ministry from Kalamazoo time on. And that kit I sent back to Allentown for I guess there's a archive room at Allentown First. Steve is waving his head. And I sent that back there because I thought that would be a good place for it to reside. So I think that the women would ask me to do a worship service at a special time of the year in Kalamazoo. I always had a seasonal worship service, and quite a few came out. There were still women that didn't support it, and there always are going to be women who do not support women. I think we're seeing that in political life, in our regular life, and in the church yet. So I don't know. I remember you mentioned, Kathy, that to probably bring up the Angela Davis situation. We probably all remember that issue in '71 when Lois Stair was moderator of GA. The General Assembly voted to support the legal aid for Angela Davis. But Subsequently, there was such a brouhaha that a group of Black pastors, I'll use that word, Black pastors, voted to pay that bill, so that the General Assembly had no part of paying that bill. But the problem is people did not hear the total truth. And so I was then at Northminster Presbyterian Church in Indianapolis, where the pastor was quite jealous of me because I was doing a lot of teaching and had a lot of people supporting me in terms of programs. Anyway, the pastor asked me to explain to the session the situation around Angela Davis. So I went to the session and I explained to them that the General Assembly had voted, but that a group of Black pastors then took over the entire bill. And so the General Assembly had no part of paying, but they didn't hear that. They just did not hear that. And they kept trying to say that that the church was communist, and they called me a communist and so on. Anyway, that was an interesting negative instrument. And from then on, even the pastor didn't believe me. So things grew worse, and the presbytery suggested that maybe since he was so jealous of my work and of me, that it would be best if I move on. And that's when I went and did my clinical pastoral training at Indiana Medical School. And then from then I got called as co-pastor of the Kettle Moraine Parish, a 6-church co-pastorate with 3 pastors and co-pastors. 2 of them are United Church of Christ. And so that was my final experience before I retired. And that was an extremely wonderful experience, because that's when I began to branch out. And I coordinated worship, and I also did much of the hospital ministry, and I got involved in golf.
Well, that's a good, golf is good if you're a realtor too, because you cover a lot of territory and you cover a lot of land in golf.
Yeah, and it's good because you begin to build relationships with people that aren't even part of your church.
That's right.
They get to know you and you minister to them, which I was able to do. And I ended up being a chaplain at 2 of the hospital's emergency rooms. And at first, the head doctor of the emergency room happened to be a Moravian minister, and he felt that there needed to be pastoral care in the emergency room. And so he began to try to build that. And at first, we as pastors were designated to sit way back in a room way back. And finally, they began to see what we could do to help them, the staff, the nurses, and the doctors. And when I retired, I was sitting in the carrel with the nurses and the doctors. And often I would be called upon as I would walk through the emergency room to call in the hospital on my own parishioners. They would stop me and say, we've got this situation. Would you be willing to pause and help us? So, and then some of those gals I played golf with, so I got to know them too. And that was great. Those were all great experiences. And I still hear from some of those nurses.
That's wonderful. And I'm going to open it up for people to ask questions. But before we get to questions, I have a little game, Margaret, that I told you I wanted to play. And so friends, and you can feel free to go ahead and unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask a question. But I call this little game 6 Degrees of Margaret Towner. Okay, so this is 6 degrees of Margaret Towner. And so go ahead and unmute, and I'm going to ask, what does Margaret Towner have in common with the Nobel Prize in Medicine? Anybody want to guess? Margaret, you can't answer this yet.
All right.
But anybody have an idea what Margaret Towner might have in common with the Nobel Prize in Medicine? Anybody have a guess?
Was the year she was ordained the same year a woman got the Nobel Prize in Medicine?
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's a really good answer. You're wrong, but it's a really, really good answer. Margaret, why don't you go ahead and tell how you got our connection?
Well, after college, I went to the Mayo Clinic as a medical photographer. And at that time, Dr. Hench was working on the cortisone. And he was coming to the place where he was going to present it nationally to the medical world. And he had to have some slides made of his talk. And so I had to spend most of the night in the dark room making the slides for Dr. Hench's speech about cortisone medicine, for which he got the Nobel Prize.
That's right. So Margaret Towner, ding, there's one. Okay, next question. Let me see if we can get here. Next question. The Big Kiss. If you are from the Sarasota area, you know the statue with the sailor kissing the nurse. It was a very famous photograph after the end of World War II. What would Margaret Towner have in common with the Big Kiss? Any guesses? Oh, I've chased you all away. Was she the nurse in that photograph?
That's what I was going to say.
No, I wasn't the nurse. No, Alfred Eisenstadt was the photographer, and he was the photographer at my ordination.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's the story on that. Now, how about anybody who knows that very famous painting, American Gothic? You know, with the very stoic people. What would Margaret Towner have in common with American Gothic? Was she the woman in that picture, in that painting? What are your guesses?
They were her parishioners.
They were her parishioners.
Not quite. No, American Gothic was painted by Grant Wood. Grant Wood was a Cedar Rapids, Iowa artist, and he painted that. The woman in the picture is Grant Wood's sister, and the man is his dentist. And Grant Wood, when my aunt, who was superintendent of schools in Benton County, Iowa for a while, and then a teacher in Cedar Rapids, when she died of cancer, the students at her high school wanted to do something in her honor, and they hired Grant Wood to paint a picture in her memory. And my mother and I walked the fields just south of Norway, Iowa, and just north of the Iowa, the Amana colonies, to find the picture that would depict my aunt's love of education. And so young corn was the picture. So that's what I have in common with Grant Wood.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. And I have one more. I think I have one more. Let me see. Okay. Rosalind Russell. Rosalind Russell. I need some guesses. Come on. I know Jan just joined us. Bronwyn, Stephen, Colleen, come on. What could Margaret Towner have in common with Rosalind Russell? I mean,
She was mistaken for her once.
she was mistaken for her once. Okay.
She's been on the cover of a major magazine as often as Rosalind Russell.
That is very close, Jan.
Right, yep.
Very, very close. Okay, Margaret, why don't you?
We were both in the same issue of Life magazine, and she was my alter ego.
Margaret, you used to say that was you on the cover of Life magazine. So that was.
I did? I don't remember that.
Well, I do, because
Okay.
that's the story. And so Margaret shared the story that there was a picture of Rosalind Russell on the cover of Life magazine, and it happened to be the same issue in which Margaret was featured as the first woman ordained to ministry.
Right.
Yeah. So I'd like anyone, so grateful for those.
I'd like to know where all of you serve, where all of you are.
So if we could start, Stephen, you are the first person that I see on my screen. And
Sorry. Margaret knows. So I have the honor of having served at First Presbyterian Church in Allentown. I was a member of the pastoral staff for 28 years. I just retired at the end of January. And Margaret is held in high esteem in that congregation, even though we have to keep reminding people every time we tell that church's history. Yes, the very first woman ordained was on our staff at the time. However, she wasn't allowed to do communion. She wasn't allowed. So we set the record straight. We had we've had many women pastors over the years. Lindsay Heron Lewis, who's now in Ohio, in our sanctuary. Margaret, was the sanctuary built before you left, the new one?
Yeah, I was there to break ground for it.
Okay,
And,
so they moved.
But I was not there when it was finally finished.
So they moved out from downtown to the country, which now isn't the country.
Right.
It built a new sanctuary in 58. And along the one wall are the traditional stained glass windows from downtown Allentown's church. But the other side are much more modern figures in American Presbyterianism. And I know this will shock you. They're all men. And so Lindsay Heron Lewis always was trying to raise funds that we were going to knock one of those windows out and put Margaret's face up there.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks, Steve, I didn't know that.
Good to see you, Margaret.
Good
And
to
it's
see
never
you.
too late. It's never too late to knock on the window.
Right,
Let's blow the top off of a glass ceiling while we're at it.
I know. Well, at least would it be in glass, right?
There you go. Bronwyn, you're the next person on my screen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bronwyn Boswell. I have been ordained for 36 years now, and I'm currently the acting stated clerk for the Presbyterian Church USA.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
And we're
That's a big job.
It is a big job. It is a big job. And but yeah, talk about some glass ceilings. Yes, we're there.
Yeah, I just recorded a prayer to close the Peace River Presbytery meeting this Saturday. And the Carson Brown is our moderator. And he's on one of your General Assembly committees to work on the merger of the two committees, Mission and General
OGA, right? Yep, we're working on all of that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Carson was at the Mid-Council conference last week as well.
Yeah.
Right. And before this, I more recently have been the general presbyter in Shenandoah Presbytery. And before that in Western New York. So I know Cayuga, Syracuse as well. So yeah,
Good.
it's great. Good to be here.
Thank you. And Shannon, you're next on my screen. Come say hello and introduce yourself. And if you have a question you want to share.
Yeah, hello, I'm Shannon. I'm in northeast Kansas, and right now I'm sitting in Blue Rapids, but I serve in in two different counties here in multiple parishes. And I am joined by, I'm gonna put you on screen.
Oh, okay.
I am joined by this elder Connie. She's
Hi.
from Blue Rapids.
Good.
And then Alice is going through the CLP program.
Wonderful. Welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, how do you ladies have a question?
No, I kind of understand where she's coming from.
Alice was the first female
Elder.
elder ordained here in Blue Rapids.
Yeah. In the 90s, early 90s. We were a little behind.
Well, it's better to be behind and come out.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Well, thank you for being with us. And the next person I see on my screen is Jan Edmiston. Nice to see you, Jan.
Hi, Jan. How are you?
Hey, Marg, I'm so glad to see you. I was just looking for a picture I have with you. And when I was at Peace River Presbytery, so I'm now the general presbyter in
Down at
Charlotte.
Bonita Springs.
Yes, that's exact. Good memory. Wow. I know. Do you remember what I was wearing?
No.
Good. I don't either. Anyway, I do remember that. So a whole bunch of women who were ordained in that presbytery, we took a big group picture with you, and I don't remember who the new minister was, but somebody was examined for ordination, and you did the ordination prayer. Do you remember that?
That was Kelly.
Kelly Fitzgerald.
Yep.
Kelly
Oh my goodness. And
Fitzgerald.
she wept. I mean, the thought of you being the person to stand there with her. So you're praying and she's standing there with tears rolling down her face. It's one of my favorite pictures.
Yeah, unfortunately, she's been mistreated by our presbytery.
Oh,
And
I am so
by
sorry.
the pastor she was working with, he was very racist and sexist.
Oh, I'm so sorry. But I'm so grateful for you. So you've been, I know I missed this because I came in late. Denise Anderson and I were elected co-moderators of the General Assembly the year that you celebrated your 60th anniversary. And I've had a really long day, so I can't do the math. So how long have you been ordained?
Is it 67?
67.
It's
1956.
Yes, so it's October 24th, which is next week.
57.
It'll be 7 years. So that's her order. Yes. And
that's fantastic. Well, we love you in Charlotte, North Carolina and beyond. And I'm just so grateful. It feels an honor. And I see your buddy back there.
Roommate. Yeah.
Your bodyguard. Yeah.
You're right.
It's great to see you, Marg.
Yeah, that was a great service.
Oh, it was. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And Jan, you're at North, where are you? North Charlotte? Where are you?
I'm in Charlotte. I'm in Charlotte Presbytery. So before that, I was in Chicago, and I'm thrilled to be here. North Carolina is my home state, so I never thought I'd ever be back here, but it's really great. So I feel very fortunate that I get to be here.
Well, I think one of our clergy women retired is Susan DeWingert, and I believe her daughter is there. And isn't she in Charlotte?
I don't know. Is Susan in Charlotte then?
No, Susan's back in Sarasota. She's part of
this, but I was thinking of her daughter.
The daughter's in Atlanta, I think.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's one that's ordained.
Yeah, I don't know.
We have 95 clergy women in this presbytery now. So
wonderful.
It's very good. Yeah.
Do you get together?
We have so many, it's hard to get together. I'll be honest with you. In the days when I was first ordained in Albany Presbytery, there were about 6 of us. Then I went to National Capital Presbytery and there were about 15 of us. Bronwyn was a child back then. Yeah. She was under care. But we almost can't fit into a room anymore, but it's pretty great.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I see the next person on the screen. Margaret is a member of Cayuga Syracuse Presbytery. She's our treasurer, so she keeps us on the straight and narrow. And Anne, I don't know if you knew this, but when Margaret was talking about the East Genesee Street, which is the Korean church now, Margaret was there when they dedicated the sanctuary. Correct, Margaret?
Yes, I was there when they had the old sanctuary, and we were afraid that it would cave in, and so they had to tear it down and build a new sanctuary, which now is the Korean Presbyterian Church. But Herb Schrader was the pastor at that time. And we worshiped at the Baptist church, which was just up the hill. And I always worried about the choir falling into the baptismal font.
And I have a much more significant responsibility in Geauga, Syracuse, and that is that I am the resource person for history. We have various people who serve as resource people because we have had a collection at our resource center, and we have custody of that, and we answer questions for people. But I didn't learn about you in the church, Margaret. I learned about you from Ansha Lemke in library school at Syracuse. And Ansha was a daughter of Rudolph Bultmann, and she educated us very well about the history of our local Presbyterian and Protestant churches.
Good.
As well as about being a librarian. That was very important.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Anne. Susan, I see that you're next. Susan is also a member of the Cayuga Syracuse Presbytery. Would you like to say anything, Susan? I have to unmute you. Yeah, I don't know if we can get you unmuted, Susan. Susan is a member of the Mexico Presbyterian Church up in Mexico, New York.
Mm-hmm.
He also is serving on the Vision and Strategy Committee here in Syracuse. And I'm sorry, I can't get you unmuted, Susan. If you can figure it out, we'll come back. And then Susan Rose, there you are.
Oh, there she is.
Hi.
I keep forgetting to unmute.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm an elder at the Mexico Church also, and like Kathy said, I'm on the Vision and Strategy Committee, and I'm also a co-moderator of Presbyterian Women of the Synod of Cayuga, Syracuse. I'm the newsletter editor for the Synod of the Northeast, PW.
Wonderful. That's quite a big job. Or several big jobs.
At times.
Thank you for joining us, Susan. And right next door to you is Susan Rose. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Susan Rose. I am with the St. Augustine Presbytery. I'm currently moderator. I founded a nonprofit to mentor women in ministry. And Margaret, I told part of your story in my dissertation. I quoted Jan in my dissertation. So my nonprofit is a validated ministry. I currently serve as moderator of the Presbytery, and I just finished a call with a church yesterday, and I start a new call as a transitional pastor in 2 weeks. So
where are you going?
I'm going to St. Giles Presbyterian Church in Orange Park. And I just finished with Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Augustine as a parish associate.
Okay.
So I am bivocational, part-time. I do part-time ministry. I do part-time jobs. I do a lot of part-time jobs.
Good.
So, yeah.
Where was your dissertation?
It was out of Portland Seminary, Portland, Oregon, George Fox.
Okay.
I worked with Mary Kate Morris in the leadership and spiritual formation program that they have there. So, yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for being with us, Susan. Shannon, I don't see you, but I see that you're next on my screen. Okay. And you already introduced yourself. We've been on twice. And I see Jan's. For some reason, I've gotten duplicates here. Okay, Colleen. We haven't gotten to Colleen yet, have we?
No. Dr. Towner, it's so cool to be with you. My name is Colleen Earp, and I serve as the program director at Massanutten Springs Camp and Conference Center in Western Virginia.
Yes.
and I am ordained to this position, and I'm coming up on the second anniversary of my ordination on October 24th.
Wonderful.
And so I didn't know that when we picked
Same
that
day.
date.
Good.
Date was just the day that the board of Massanetta Springs was meeting, and so they said, let's just do it
Wonderful.
during our meeting. And then of course PCUSA made a big splash about your 65th ordiversary, and I couldn't believe that connection. And I knew your name, and I knew I was standing on the shoulder of giants at my ordination, so many of them on this Zoom, and I'm so grateful for the ways that you blazed the trail for me. So
Thank you for continuing it.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the 24th.
Thank you. You too.
I'll wish you 67 years at least.
Erin, you are next on my screen.
I'll echo Colleen. I'm really, and everyone, I'm really thrilled to be here. I am an MDiv student at Duke. I am an inquirer under the care of NCP, and I serve at Fairfax Presbyterian in Fairfax, Virginia. And it's just so thrilling to just sit here and listen and to have this opportunity. So I'm very grateful just to sit at the feet of your stories, all of you. Dr. Towner, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and congratulations, and God bless.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the journey towards ordination has its bumps, but they're always good preparation for the bumps and curves that you find in ordered ministry as you continue. So, Erin, keep the faith. I see Sherry Skinner. Sherry is a member at First Presbyterian Church in Cazenovia, and I think he has something in common with your ordination, Margaret, if I'm not mistaken. Sherry, you want to say something?
Well, I sang at the closing of the First Presbyterian Church, which was several years ago. We had a wonderful combined choir from the Presbytery, and we had every living organist play at that service.
Wow.
Really. But I have another question to ask you, Margaret. This is Art Malpe, who you spoke of earlier from Park Central. Was his wife Betty?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Art and oh dear, I've forgotten her name, but it was not. No.
Okay, because there was a Betty Malpe who went to Park Central as well.
Yeah.
But I am just absolutely amazed at your memory of being able to share your story with us tonight. It's just been very, very inspirational. And I'm not ordained, but I am
You're ordained as an elder.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's important.
Thank you. Sherry, glad you're here with us. And I see Agnes, but Agnes, that doesn't look like you.
Yeah. Oh, that looks better.
If you want to unmute yourself and say hello, you're muted at the moment. There you go.
I think the dog looks better, actually. I'm Agnes Brady. I am retired about a year, ordained 42 years, spent almost all of that time serving in small rural churches, scattered throughout the United States and overseas as well.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Agnes. It's very good to meet you. About 17, 18, I don't know, it was a long time ago, 18 or 19 years ago, I had a production business. My first career was in television production. And I had decided, I was discerning a call, even though I didn't realize it. And I got a call from this woman and said, I gave a speech at the General Assembly. They want me to record it, and I forgot to record it. And I said, sure, this is my fee. And then I never heard from her again. And I just figured, well, she thought my fee was too expensive. And a few months went by, and my business was folding. So I had to sell all of my video equipment. And I got a call again from that woman. And she said, well, I still need to get this done, and they need to get it. And I said, great, we can do it either Tuesday or Wednesday, because I was selling the equipment. I was not in a very happy place in my life. So I met this woman down at Church of the Palms in Sarasota, Florida, and we got skirted around to different places, and very friendly woman. And she started to try and initiate a conversation. And she said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going up to Skinny Atlas. And she said, oh, I used to be a photographer in Syracuse. And she chatted about this and that. And then we started recording. And as I was hearing her story, I realized this was the very first woman who was ever ordained to ministry in the Presbyterian Church USA. And little did I know on that day, back in September, I guess it was, of 2007, that a year later, I would be beginning my faith journey at seminary. And so I was very pleased to be ordained as a minister of Word and Sacrament in the same presbytery as my dear friend, the Reverend Dr. Margaret Towner. And I will always look to that moment as one of those little God winks, where God just kind of gives you a kick in the pants and says, go and do it.
Right.
I want to thank you all very much. And Margaret, anything else you want to share? And
well, I just am overwhelmed with the stature and the enthusiasm of all of you and the ministries that you are doing, whether they are elders or inquirers or ordained clergy. It's overwhelming to me that this has gotten to the point where we are strong, and we are striving, I think, to help make a world of peace. I'm upset by the way by which we are sometimes acting in the church, and especially in our national government. I think we need to try to push harder at feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, and helping out with the sick, and praying for peace, and especially in our communities where we have a lot of racism and sexism going on. It's very hard to. My neighbor next door is Jewish, and she belongs to one of the strong synagogues here, which have to have police on guard all the time, and that's hard to to be encouraging of her. And one of the great things that happened last week was that the Church of the Palms here in Sarasota went to Friday night to join the Temple Sinai in their evening meal and support that temple and encourage them. So it really, I've seen problems develop throughout the years. And as I said, every time we get somewhere significant, then we reorganize. And that's what we're doing now, again, reorganizing. And that is something that bothers me a great deal. Anyway, but I wish you all God's blessing, and that you will be strong and faithful leaders of Christ Church.
well, and Margaret, I know it's not polite to ask a woman's age, but can we share your age?
98.
You're 98. 98 and 3/4, I might add.
Well, in March, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to thank Kathy for all of her support and friendship. And I remember the first day I met her after she photographed me. came back as a member of Presbytery, and I got a chance to get to meet her. But Kathy, thank you for all of the ministry that you are doing and that you have done to me.
Thank you. And if I can just ask one more thing, Margaret, will you close us in prayer?
Sure. Loving and gracious God, these are indeed challenging times in our lives, but we give you thanks that you have called us through your Holy Spirit to be your servants, to be your leaders. Fill us with the Spirit and show us how we may do the great things that you call us to do to help bring peace and wholeness, not only in our congregations and in our communities, but work towards peace in the world. We give you thanks for all of these servants, and we pray that their retirement or their challenges in new ministries will be enriching and nourishing and challenging. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. And God's blessings to you always, Margaret.
Thank you. Sunday, I have another Zoom with members, retired clergy in Milwaukee Presbytery.
Yeah, you get around.
Tell Deborah hi.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave and listen to the President of the United States, who's speaking live from the Oval Office.
I don't want to hold you up.
Bless him.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Mark.
Thank
Bye.
you. It was wonderful.
Love you, Marg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.